Are you ready to get into Yah's Word today? I am as well. I want to invite you to open your Bibles with me to Exodus chapter 13. We're going to begin with verse 1 in just a moment, and we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject today. We're going to be talking about phylacteries, or tefillin in Hebrew. What are tefillin? Well, according to tradition, they are two small black cubes made out of the hide of a clean animal that are to be wrapped around the hand and the arm, with the cube or the box facing the heart, and also placed between the eyes. And they are to be a sign to the children of Israel that they are to have the Torah of Yah in their mouths and living according to the commandments. They are also to remind the children of Israel that Yah brought them out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery with a mighty hand. And we're going to read the four portions of the Torah that are placed inside of these small black boxes. And we're going to be looking at the context, because some people believe that this sign should be taken figuratively, and others believe that they should be taken literally. So we'll look at the context and we'll determine what's appropriate. Then we're also going to be looking at what Yeshua taught about phylacteries in Matthew chapter 23, and then we're going to take it into a new covenant perspective in Jeremiah 31. Let's begin with Exodus chapter 13 and verse 1. It says, "And Yah spoke to Moshe, saying, Set apart to me all the firstborn, the one opening the womb among the children of Israel, among man and among beast, it is mine. And Moshe said to the people, Remember this day in which you went out of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery, for by strength of hand Yah brought you out of this place. And whatever is leavened shall not be eaten. Today you are going out in the new moon Aviv. And it shall be, when Yah brings you into the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this new moon. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day is a festival to Yah. Unleavened bread is to be eaten the 7 days, and whatever is leavened is not to be seen with you, and leaven is not to be seen with you within all your border. And you shall inform your son in that day, saying, It is because of what Yah did for me when I came up from Mitzrayim. Notice, and it shall be as a sign to you on your hand, and as a reminder between your eyes, that the Torah of Yah is to be in your mouth. For with a strong hand Yah has brought you out of Mitzrayim, and you shall guard this law at its appointed time from year to year." Notice it says, and it shall be as a sign to you. A sign is something you can see on your hand, and as a reminder, it's supposed to remind you of something between your eyes, that the Torah of Yah is to be in your mouth. You're to speak forth this wonderful Torah. For with a strong hand Yah has brought you out of Mitzrayim. And so if you look at this in its context, everything else in chapter 13 is literal. So to say that verse 9 alone is figurative doesn't seem to match the context. Now, let's continue with the second passage that's in the little black boxes, and that is Exodus chapter 13, beginning with verse 11. It says, "And it shall be, when Yah brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall give over to Yah every one opening the womb, and every firstborn that comes from your livestock. The males belong to Yah. But every firstborn of a donkey you are to ransom with a lamb, and if you do not ransom it, then you shall break its neck. And every firstborn of man among your sons you are to ransom. And it shall be, when your sons ask you in time to come, saying, What is this? Then you shall say to him, By strength of hand Yah brought us out of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage. And it came to be, when Paro was too hardened to let us go, that Yah killed every firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I am slaughtering to Yah every male that opened the womb, but every firstborn of my sons I ransom. And it shall be as a sign on your hand. There it is again. And it shall be as a sign on your hand, and as frontlets between your eyes. For by strength of hand Yah brought us out of Mitzrayim. Again, a sign is something that you can see, and if it's going to remind you of something, then you must be able to see it. According to context in Exodus 13, it is all spoken of literally. All right, let's go to the next passage. Passage number 3, this is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Starting with verse 4, this is the Shema. Shema is a Hebrew word that means to hear and obey. Notice what it says. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. Hear, O Israel, Yah our Elohim, Yah is one. So it says, Hear, O Israel. Should that be taken figuratively or literally? Well, literally. And you shall love Yah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being and with all your might. Should that be taken literally or figuratively? Literally, of course. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon your children, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Should those things be taken literally or figuratively? Literally, of course. Notice, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So everything in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9 should be taken literally, including this sign that should be on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes. And then let's go over to Deuteronomy chapter 11. And this is the fourth passage that is inside the small black cubes. Deuteronomy chapter 11, beginning with verse 13, it says, And it shall be that if you diligently obey the commands which I command you today, to love Yah your Elohim, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your being, then I shall give you the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the latter rain, and you shall gather in your grain and your new wine and your oil, and I shall give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be satisfied. Guard yourselves, lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other mighty ones, and bow down to them. Then the displeasure of Yah shall burn against you, and he shall shut up the heavens, and there be no rain, and the land not give its increase, and you shall perish quickly from the good land which Yah is giving you. Now, are all those things mentioned literal or figurative? Well, they are literal. And then we go on. It says, And you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your being, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, something that can be seen to remind you. and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up, and shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children are increased on the soil of which Yah swore to your fathers to give them, as the days of the heavens on the earth. Again, everything in Deuteronomy 11, starting with verse 13 through verse 21, everything is literal. There's nothing there that's figurative. And so this sign, according to context, should be a literal sign. Now we can talk about what all it means and how it should be done, and we'll do that in a later teaching. But it's interesting that Yeshua actually taught about phylactery. So let's go over to Matthew chapter 23 and see if Yeshua said, oh, it's just figurative and you don't need to do it, or he teaches against it. Let's see what he says about it. Matthew 23, starting with verse 1. It says, Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and to his taught ones, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe. In other words, they have authority to proclaim the Torah of Moshe. They teach the Torah of Moshe to the people. They have that authority. As a matter of fact, archaeologists have discovered the actual seat of Moshe was an ornate seat in the synagogue where someone would sit and teach the Torah of Moshe. So what Yeshua said, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe. They have the authority to teach the Torah. Therefore, whatever they say to you to guard, guard and do. When they teach you the Torah, when they teach you Moshe, then you obey what's written in the Torah. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. In other words, don't be hypocritical. Now, he's not speaking about every single one of them. He's speaking in general, to be cautious of these who are in authority, these religious elite, because often they say things and then they don't do it. They're hypocritical. They say one thing and do another. He says, don't follow their examples in hypocrisy. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their finger they do not wish to move them. So the heavy burdens hard to bear that Yeshua is speaking of here are all the takanot and ma'asim, all the man-made rules and regulations added by the religious elite. So the idea was we don't want to break the command, so we build a hedge around the commandment. So you don't break the hedge, that way you don't break the command. Well, in every generation, another person comes along and they want to build a name for themselves, so they make a hedge around the hedge, and then there's a hedge around that hedge. And then finally, it gets so complicated. Yeshua calls it heavy burdens hard to bear. And they lay them on men's shoulders, and yet they're not willing to actually do the very things that they are saying. He goes on to say, and they do all their works to be seen by men. And they make their tefillin wide and lengthen the tzitzit of their garments. So they make the leather straps that bind these black boxes on their arm and place them between the eyes. They make the straps wide to be seen. That was the idea. They wanted the approval of men. They wanted to be praised by men. So they wanted to be seen in the way that they were practicing this Torah exhortation, this commandment, to have a sign on your hand and frontlets between your eyes. So they're doing it to be seen by men. So Yeshua is not saying don't do it. He's not teaching against it. He's not saying, oh, it's not necessary. As a matter of fact, I believe that Yeshua also wore the tefillin. and he put the sign on his arm and put the little box between his eyes. And I believe that was a common practice in the synagogue in those days, and Yeshua would have practiced it. But he was saying their motive is wrong. He's not saying that the practice is wrong, but their motive is wrong. They wanted to be seen by men. Notice it says, for they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their finger they do not wish to move them, and they do all their works to be seen by men. And they make their tefillin wide and lengthen the tzitzit of their garments. In other words, make their tassels really long. They wear them long because they want to be seen by men. So we'll read in just a moment the passage that pertains to the tzitziot, the tassels. But the tzitziot were assigned to the wearer, that they are covenant children, and to remind them of the commandments. And when they obey the commandments, then they're keeping covenant with Yah, and Yah will keep his side of the covenant, which is to hear and answer our prayers and fulfill his promises. We know that Yeshua wore them because the woman with the issue of blood reached up and took hold of his tzitzit, because the tzitzit was a symbol of the covenant, and there was healing in the covenant. And this woman, this Jewish woman, knew that, and so she was reaching for the promise of healing. And that's how she received her healing, through her belief that Yeshua was a representative of the covenant, and if she could get her hand upon his tzitzit, she could be healed. So we know that Yeshua wore the tzitziot. But Yeshua was saying they did these things as a show to get the attention of men, and their motives were wrong. All right. Verse 5. And they do all their works to be seen by men, and they make their tefillin wide and lengthen the tzitzit of their garments, and they love the best place at feasts, and the best seats in the congregations, and the greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you, do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Messiah, and you are all brothers. Don't exalt yourself above other people. In other words, serve people. Be a servant to others. Don't exalt yourself. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in the heavens. Neither be called leaders, for one is your leader, the Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. This is the point, really, of this teaching. He's teaching humility and service. And whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. And so he didn't say, don't place the tefillin on your arm or between your eyes. He didn't say that. He didn't say, oh, that's just figurative. You don't need to do it. He said, don't do it incorrectly. He didn't teach against it. He taught against doing it incorrectly with the wrong motives. I believe he did it, and he said, follow me. So I believe we need to take seriously this charge. What does it mean? Well, we'll work it out. But I believe we need to take it seriously. I believe Yeshua wore the tefillin. I believe he wore the tzitziot. And we need to do the same. But we need to do it correctly with the right motive. Now let's go quickly over to Numbers 15. And I'll share that passage of scripture about the tzitziot. Numbers 15, we'll start with verse 37. Notice what it says. And Yah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them to make tzitzit, or tzitziot, that's the plural, on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue cord in the tzitzit of the corners, and it shall be to you for a tzitzit, and you shall see it. See, it's a sign. You shall see it, and shall remember all the commands of Yah, and shall do them, and not search after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you went whoring, so that you remember and shall do all my commands, and be set apart unto your Elohim. I am Yah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, to be your Elohim. I am Yah, your Elohim. Many of us believe that we should wear the tzitzit, but fewer of us are wearing the Tefillin. And they're very similar. They're both signs, and they're both to remind us that we are covenant children, we are to obey the commandments, and that Yah brought us out of the house of slavery. And so I am charging us as followers of Yeshua, those who observe Torah, that we need to take seriously the Tefillin and the sign that Yah said we need to have around our hand and our arm and between our eyes, and what we are to be reminded of, that we should have the Torah in our mouths, that we should live according to the Torah, keep the commandments, and to remember that we were bound and in slavery in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, and Yah brought us out with a mighty hand. All right, let's go over to Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah 31:31, and we'll look at the New Covenant perspective. Jeremiah 31:31. Notice what it says here. See, the days are coming, declares Yah, when I shall make a renewed or a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Yehudah. It's renewed in a couple of senses. It's renewed with the same people group, and it has the same 10 words as the marital vows. But there's something new about the new covenant. It is a better covenant based on better promises, and the better promises have to do with what Yah promises to do in us when we believe upon his son Yeshua and submit to water immersion. We receive the circumcision of the heart, the circumcision of Messiah. We receive the I want to obey heart and the power to be obedient. Yah is going to do something in us to enable us to be able to love him the way he wants to be loved through obedience. And that's what makes the new covenant a better covenant. These wonderful promises that Yah has made to us, that he's going to do a work in us to ensure that we are going to be able to keep covenant with him, because he doesn't want another failed marriage. Notice that the new covenant is cut with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehudah. There is no covenant cut with a Roman-rooted Gentile church. You have to be grafted into believing Israel. It says, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I strengthened their hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim. In other words, I took them by the hand and I brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim. Notice, my covenant which they broke, they discontinued in the commandments. Though I was a husband to them, I was married to them, and I was a good husband to them, declares Yah. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Israel after those days. That's the whole house of Israel after the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua, declares Yah. Notice, I shall put my Torah in their inward parts. In other words, in their minds, it says in Hebrews chapter 8. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And so this reminds me of the Tefillin, because they were to wrap around their hand and around their arm this wonderful box that contained portions of the Torah. And according to tradition, it was to face their heart, and then they were to place it between their eyes. And what does it say here in Jeremiah 31:31 and following? That in the new covenant, the Father is going to place his Torah in our minds so that we think about how we can love him through obedience. Well, that's where that little box is. It's between the eyes, right above the forehead, and it represents that the Torah of Yah is in our minds. It's also, as it says here, written upon our hearts. Yah's going to do that. And we see the Tefillin wrapped around the hand and wrapped around the arm, and the box is facing the heart. Yah says, I'm going to take that same finger that I wrote the 10 words on those tablets of stone, and I'm going to etch those 10 words on your heart. And so what's definitive of the new covenant? What's definitive of the new covenant is that the Torah of Yah has been internalized. It's placed in our minds. It's written upon our hearts. And when we wear the Tefillin, then we are reminded of the new covenant. We're reminded that we have become like a living Ark of the Covenant because the Torah has been internalized. And the second giving of the Torah is that the Father has etched on our heart's tablets his 10 words, and he's placed his Torah in our minds. It's the very thing that when we put on the Tefillin, it's those same places, the mind and the heart. And really it's the connection between the mind and the actions. You have it around your hand. You have it here. You have it also around your hand, your arm. And so we think about how we can love Yah through obedience. We have his Torah in our minds. It's really coming forth from our heart into our actions. And we live it out before the people. It says in Proverbs 6:23 that the command is a lamp and the Torah a light. Yeshua was the embodiment of the Torah. He kept it perfectly. So he said, I am the light of the world. But in essence, he said, if you follow me, you will become the light of the world. Through your example of Torah obedience, you bring light to a dark world. And these are the things that we think about when we put this sign on our hand and arm and we place it as frontlets between our eyes. I really don't see this practice much in our movement of people who believe in Yeshua and follow him in the ways of Yah, observing the Torah. And this is a message to begin to stir things and shake things. And I believe Yah will use this message to get people thinking. And I think it's time for us to return to this beautiful Torah principle. Hallelujah.